Hey, welcome to episode 1 of a Witchful Journey podcast. I'm April, the nerdy witch behind the mic, and today I want to dive into the Deep South with the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, or New Orleans. Before we get into that though, being that I'm a nerdy witch, I must inhale all of the witchy and spiritual information that I can find because I always want to know all the things about everything. And I want to share it with you. We're going to start with a tarot card to kick us off. This card comes from the Tarot of the Shadow Realm deck, which is made by EarthMoonMagick. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check those out. Today's card is the Eight of Swords. Now, the Eight of Swords is about recognizing and remembering that you have the power to change your circumstances. You might be feeling emotionally, mentally, or physically paralyzed, stuck, alone, or like negativity just keeps coming up all around you. Maybe it's even invaded your thoughts and your self-talk. And that's hard, without a doubt. I've been there, and I know it's a tough thing to bring yourself back out of that. But you can break free from it. It isn't easy, and you gotta really work at it, but you can break free from the chokehold that things like anxiety and negativity can have. You are in control of how you react or respond to things around you. Let's say your day isn't going well. Will you choose to allow that to determine how you interact with everyone around you, including yourself? Because whether you know it or not, you interact with yourself all the time through self-talk. Or will you choose to say, okay, this isn't what I planned on or what I thought would happen. At this point, I can't change that part, but I can do things to improve my situation. What are the things that I can do? And then do the damn thing. Whether that's taking steps to gain confidence in yourself or getting a therapist to help you work through some really hard shit, or distancing yourself from someone who isn't good for your well-being. In the latter case, I strongly suggest taking whatever safe measures are necessary, not just magical ones. But this is a tough love kind of card, and it's meant to remind you that your situation or your current circumstances are not permanent, and you can do things to make it better. Whew, that was kind of a heavy one for our first daily card. Apparently we're having a rip the band-aid off kind of episode today. I was expecting something more cheery. Let's head south, shall we? Practically into the bayou. The Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. Born in the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana, on September 10th, 1801, Marie Laveau was purportedly the most powerful of the city's voodoo practitioners. Probably why she got the title of Voodoo Queen, and why there's a voodoo shop / museum named after her. I'd say it's a safe bet that she was pretty damn well known and powerful. Laveau wasn't just a voodoo practitioner, though. She was a healer, an herbalist, a midwife, a hairstylist, and a community activist. She sounds like a beautiful badass, and I don't know about you, but I'm here for it. She would visit with and had the power to save prisoners who were sentenced to death. I did find some notations that she may have used her herbal knowledge to assist in an early eternal sleep for some prisoners, but nothing to actually back that up. She would provide lessons to the women in the community, which is great, and I really wish I had been able to find out more about what lessons she taught. She was known to have used her herbal remedies and prayers to care for the sick in her community during the 1878 yellow fever epidemic, which, you go girl. Wealthy women would turn to Laveau for her psychic readings and advice, and for her gree-gree bags, which are voodoo talismans filled with various items from herbs, oils, stones, and feathers to bones, hair, nails, and grave dirt. We'll get more into talking about those in a later episode. Don't you worry. People would seek Laveau out and appeal to or pay her to help with family disputes, health problems, or issues with finance. They would receive charms, advice, and or have a ritual performed depending on their needs, because, let's be honest, there isn't a one-size-fits-all when it comes to magic. Laveau infused Roman Catholic saints, African saints and spiritualism, and Native American spiritualism into her practices, and had a few different places where she would provide her services to the community. One of those places was at her own home on St. Anne Street. There, she would meet with clients and advise them privately. In her backyard, she would perform ceremonies involving conjuring up the spirit of the great zombie, a Dumbala Wado. And guys, I'm just a Northern American witch who only knows a little French, so I apologize if I butchered that pronunciation, and for any moment in the future when that will inevitably happen. Anyway, the great zombie would manifest as a snake. Now, it's said that Laveau also had a pet snake that she named Zombie after this deity. Whether she involved the snake in her ceremonies or the snake was a physical manifestation of the deity, I can't say either way because I'm not Laveau and I wasn't there. But either way, that's pretty awesome, and it totally sounds like the snake, if not a physical manifestation of the deity, was probably what would be referred to as a familiar by today's witchcraft lingo. We'll also talk about those in yet another future episode. The second and very public place that Laveau would provide her services was in Congo Square. Congo Square now looks like it would be a pretty sweet place to visit. In Laveau's time, it was the only place, per city ordinance, where the enslaved were allowed to gather, and only on Sundays. So on Sundays, Laveau's followers and fellow voodoo practitioners, both free and enslaved, would gather within Congo Square to meet, buy and sell goods at the open markets, dance, and worship. There would be women walking around with baskets of fresh-made goods called kalas, which were deep-fried rice cakes covered in powdered sugar, which sound amazing and delicious. And it sounds like it was absolutely a day and a place for spiritual rejuvenation. I've never been to Congo Square, but can we just take a few seconds to conjure up what Congo Square on a Sunday would be like? I feel like the air would be buzzing, and I can almost hear the music that would be playing. You know what I mean? If anyone has visited Congo Square or knows more about that, I'd love to hear about it. The third place where Laveau would provide services was at Bayou St. John's on Lake Pontchartrain. This location was limited to just the initiated voodoo practitioners, and it's where the major ceremonies would take place. There would be singing, dancing, drumming, and spirit possession at this location. I read somewhere about how people, those who weren't allowed in these closed ceremonies, would sometimes watch the ceremonies take place from afar, probably hiding somewhere in the distance. That seems to be the only way that anyone else would know about anything that happened during those ceremonies. Marie Laveau seems to have such a strong influence on New Orleans voodoo that after she passed away in June of 1881, there apparently was a large drop in the number of adherents to the practice. There doesn't seem to be anything fishy about her passing. Everything I've read says she passed away of natural causes in her home. Yet, there are apparently some reports of people seeing her long after her death. I did find an interesting curse that claims to be hers. But she did have a daughter, Marie Laveau II, who carried on Laveau's legacy after her passing. It's not clear as to which Marie Laveau this curse is supposed to have been said by, and I debated reading it to you, and decided that, for the sake of being thorough, because I'm all about that, I will read it to you with the preface, that it talks about her enemies, making things very difficult for her. And she curses these particular people and their offspring with every misfortune that could be thought of, and it's very specific. Like, if you're going to curse someone, this is how specific you have to get. So, if you're the type of person who adheres to the belief that just hearing a curse will put that curse on you, which I'm not judging, but I would recommend skipping ahead about 3 minutes. Here we go. To the man god. O great one, I have been sorely tried by my enemies, and have been blasphemed and lied against. My good thoughts and my honest actions have been turned to bad actions and dishonest ideas. My home has been disrespected. My children have been cursed and ill-treated. My dear ones have been backbitten and their virtue questioned. O man god, I beg that this that I ask for my enemies comes to pass, that the south wind shall scorch their bodies and make them wither, and shall not be tempered to them. That the north wind shall freeze their blood and numb their muscles, and that it shall not be tempered to them. That the west wind shall blow away their life's breath, and will not leave their hair to grow, and that their fingernails shall fall off, and their bones shall crumble. That the east wind shall make their minds grow dark, their sight shall fail, and their seed shall dry up, so that they shall not multiply. I ask that their fathers and mothers from their furthest generation will not intercede for them before the great throne, and the wombs of their women shall not bear fruit except for strangers, and that they shall become extinct. I pray that the children who come shall be weak of mind and paralyzed of limb, and that they themselves shall curse them in their turn for ever turning a breath of life into their bodies. I pray that disease and death shall forever be with them, and that their worldly goods shall not prosper, and that their crops shall not multiply, and that their cows, their sheep, and their hogs, and all their living beasts shall die of starvation and thirst. I pray that their house shall be unroofed, and the rain and the thunder and the lightning shall find the innermost recesses of their home, and the foundation shall crumble, and the floods tear it asunder. I pray that the sun shall not shed its rays on them in benevolence, but instead it shall beat down on them, and burn them and destroy them. I pray that the moon shall not give them peace, but instead deride them and decry them, and cause their minds to shrivel. I pray that their friends shall betray them and cause them loss of power, of gold and of silver, and that their enemies shall smite them until they beg for mercy, which shall not be given them. I pray that their tongues shall forget how to speak in sweet words, and that it shall be paralyzed, and that all of them will be in desolation, pestilence, and death. O man God, I ask you for all these things, because they have dragged me in the dust, and destroyed my good name, broken my heart, and caused me to curse the day that I was born. So be it. Like, no disrespect, girl, but dang. So if you decide to check it out, I'll leave the link for that as well. I also found an energy and protection spell that's attributed to Marie Laveau. If you want to write it down, feel free to pause here and go get a pen and paper if you don't already have them with you. I'll also be putting the source link in the description for this as well, since there are a number of other goodies on the site too. Step 1. Choose an object that you own. The more precious to you, the better, but not something that you use or need on hand. Step 2. Conceal or bury this object by your front door or your most used door, or just somewhere in your yard. Step 3. Using a broom or a stick, circle the area around the object and say, "With this broom, I do make a blessed circle around my living space. No one can curse, vex, or hate the souls within this sacred place." Step 4. Spread some loose chili peppers on the entrances to your home, being careful to keep them away from small children or curious animals. Anyone who is not a true friend that walks over or under the chili peppers will never return to your home again. There was also a tradition that was started a number of decades ago wherein If you wanted Marie Laveau to grant you a wish, you had to visit her gravesite, draw 3 X's on her tomb, turn around 3 times, knock on the tomb, and yell out your wish. Then, if your wish was granted, you had to return to her gravesite, draw a circle around your X's, and leave Marie an offering. There seems to be some dispute about the location of her burial site, but it's believed to be in the St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in the Glapion family crypt. Public access to Laveau's tomb has ceased, and the only access now is by way of guided tour. Which makes sense, because while this tradition sounds kind of cool, and I'm sure there were a ton of people that would make the X's and then return later on with offerings, it's defacing someone's property, guys. I mean, that's vandalism. So I highly do not, repeat, not recommend going to Marie Laveau's tomb to draw on it. Pay your respects if you choose, but don't be drawing on anything there, okay? You'll catch a fine for that, and then I'll have to say I told you so. Oh, you know who has a really good piece of I told you so folklore? A woman by the name of Julia Brown, who may or may not have wiped out an entire town. Not too far from New Orleans. There isn't a lot that's known about Julia Brown. Even her birth date is kind of fuzzy, and the best anyone can say was that she was born around 1845. And that makes sense, because unlike Marie Laveau, Julia Brown was born into slavery. She was born Julia Bernard, and she lived in New Orleans. By most accounts, her life in New Orleans was uneventful, except that she somehow ended up becoming a free woman, from what I've been able to gather. She was widely respected and was known for her folk magic, her premonitions, her predictions, and her healing abilities. She was referred to as Aunt Julia, and people also said that she would often sit on her porch and sing various songs, some of them having to do with her premonitions. Sometime in the 1860s, Brown moved out of New Orleans to a small, remote village about 35 miles away. This village was called Frenier. And to give you an idea of how remote this place really was, I'm going to give you some numbers. The town about 4 miles to the north of Frenier, which is called Ruddock, would have seemed like going to the city in comparison. And Ruddock only had a population of about 700 people, and no electricity. I mean, a couple of brothers starting up a cypress timber company was really the only reason these 2 towns ever even existed in the first place. A trip to the nearest town where you could actually do your shopping would require you to schlep it through 10 miles of swamp. 10 miles! There were no roads to Frenier or Ruddock. The only way in or out without walking was the railway that ran through Ruddock Station. Some of the women would even entrust the engineer with their shopping lists and money, and hope that he would remember to bring back their groceries on his next pass through the area. The train did stop frequently at Ruddock Station, since Frenier and Ruddock were home to some famous sauerkraut, so it kind of sounds like they'd see the train every few days. In 1880, Julia Bernard married Celestin Brown, making her Julia Brown. Now, when they got married, Celestin had a good chunk of land, I think it was about 40 acres, that he would use as farmland. And Julia ended up inheriting it in 1914 when Celestin passed away. There are some accounts that say this is when Julia's attitude began to change, and she became more of a recluse. They also say that this is about the time that Julia began to sing one song in particular, whose lyrics went like this. One day I'm going to die and take the whole town with me. One day I'm going to die and take the whole town. Sounds a little creepy, right? Well, Julia Brown died of natural causes on September 28th, 1915. That night, a rain began to fall, and New Orleans, 35 miles away, had been notified that a storm was on its way. Meanwhile, the residents of Frenier were preparing for Julia's funeral. The next day, September 29th, 1915, Julia Brown's funeral was held at her home, on the edge of the swamp. It was still raining as her body was being put into her casket. As the funeral proceeded and they began lowering her casket into the wooden box that would then go into the ground, the rain and wind intensified until around 4 o'clock that afternoon. It got so violent that funeral goers abandoned the area and ran for cover in higher ground. It was a Category 4 hurricane that hit southeastern Louisiana that day. The winds reached somewhere between 125 and 145 miles per hour. I got varying reports on that. But it was the strongest in recorded history at that point in time. There were 15-foot storm tides coming off of Lake Pontchartrain, and by the time the hurricane finally died, Frenier and Ruddock were completely wiped off the map. There are varying accounts of the number of deaths. It ranges from 275 to 350 total. 8 of them were Frenier residents, and 59 were from Ruddock. What never varies are the claims that it seemed to be unnaturally destructive. When the waters receded, they found Julia's body, and they found the wooden box they were going to put her in, but her casket has never been found. Today, Frenier is a ghost town. The only people it seems to attract are the ones interested in the supernatural. It seems that Julia's ghost has been sighted numerous times at the edge of Lake Pontchartrain, cackling at people that wander her way. Now, no one knows exactly why Julia sang the song that goes, "One day I'll die and take the whole town with me," and I doubt anyone ever asked her, but there is speculation. Some people say that she grew increasingly upset that the natural world around her was being destroyed for profit by these timber companies looking for cypress. Some say that she felt her generosity had been taken advantage of, and that it was her way of cursing the town. One voodoo priestess says that she tends to think that Julia had a premonition, and that it wasn't a curse at all, but an attempt to save the people of the two towns from annihilation. That's the explanation that I tend to lean toward. Given that there are no statements, claims, or reports of her ever cursing or hexing anyone, it sounds like she practiced voodoo rather than hoodoo. We'll eventually talk about the differences in those in another time, but overall, voodoo is more healing practices, while hoodoo is the darker stuff. Let me know what your thoughts are on Aunt Julia, and thanks for tuning in and hanging out with me today. And if you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss out on future episodes, hit those like and follow buttons. If you feel inclined to leave a review, go ahead and do that as well. For now, you can find me on Facebook, Witchful Journey Podcast, and on Instagram at @a_witchful_journey. For those of you who need a reminder, underscores are those spaces with the little line at the bottom. You can also email me at awitchfuljourney@gmail.com. Oh, hey, by the way, as a child, did you ever see a shadow man that hung out in the corner of your room? I did. Stay tuned for episode 2 to hear that story and find out more about the shadow man and shadow people. I'm April, and this is the podcast for A Witchful Journey. Until next time!